Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 3, Episode 15, Destiny. Before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct, and we are actually live right now on YouTube for all those late night people who like to tune in. So we do apologize for any weird pauses you may experience in the live performance, because obviously we are getting this ready to release on the actual podcast, which will be out a week from now. So you're getting it live, unfiltered, so deal with it. It's basically all you can do. Right. And yes, you should definitely find us and follow us, as I say, every single week, because we're a good time and I think we're just getting better. So yeah, tune in and don't miss out. But yes, tonight we are here to talk about Destiny, the 61st episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, aired on
Yeah.
February 13th, as a matter of fact, in 1995. So long time from now, obviously, but we're still here talking about it, and it's an interesting episode to say the least. So we're just gonna get right to it. Well, I guess not right to it, because before we do anything else, I always like to check in. So, David, how was your week?
Things been good. Work's been busy post the Thanksgiving holiday, Black Friday and
Hmm.
all that. Surprisingly busy on some days. Like 2 days ago was like, wow, great day. Like people walking in being like, I want that. Being like, yes, ma'am. Like, okay, no problem. Let's do it. Which was great. Um, because I've paused my watching of The Expanse, I finally started watching House of the Dragon, which I'm on episode 3. I'm about halfway through, so we can record this. So
Okay.
of episode 3, and yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. You can I can see why people enjoyed it. Now I know you had at least started. Did you finish watching the whole season?
I did not finish watching the whole thing. Actually, you said you're on episode three.
Yes.
I think that's around where I think I either got to episode three or episode five. I'm not really sure. I'll have to go back and check. I also really enjoyed it. I thought Matt Smith he's really carrying the show for me. From what I remember of watching it, he is fantastic in every scene that I've watched him in.
Right.
Really enjoyed him, and I thought that he just really like. Not to say that everybody else wasn't good for their parts. I just feel like he does a spectacular job, and should
Right.
definitely be commended for the heavy lifting that he does on
Right.
that show.
Yeah. Yeah. He's rides one of the dragons. Caraxes, I think, is the one, which is
Yes.
pretty awesome dragon. Apparently, I've been listening to like a podcast while I've been watching the show, and apparently his dragon is like a deformed dragon. It's got a super long neck and it's got wings on its back legs, so it's even like more freaky than most dragons are, which fits his character because he's the kind of the more violent oddball of
Yeah.
the group. So
Definitely.
his dragon is kind of fits his character there. But yeah, it's I mean, I don't know how much we've talked on this show about how much Game of Thrones ended with a whimper. I mean, gosh, I hate that last season of Game of Thrones. The last best episode of the show was when Jon Snow met Daenerys at Dragonstone. That was a fantastic scene. I love that scene so much. But after that, it's like they were just like, all right, let's just be done already. We're 7 seasons in. We got one more to get through. Let's just get done,
Yeah.
get done, get done. And it's like, you guys just blew this lead you had. You had this fantastic show. So I was prepared to like say, House of the Dragon, not interested. They blew Game of Thrones. Don't want to be reminded of how that ended. And I still don't want to be reminded
Hmm.
of how it ended. But this show so far has recaptured a lot of the magic that the show originally had. Um, it's not quite as devious, the interplaying of things, at least not yet. There's still the politicking of it, but it's showing more how things gradually build, I would say. I mean, again, I'm only in the third episode, I think, of
Yeah.
10. I don't know if it's 8 or 10, but
I think
yeah,
it's
so
10.
far.
I think
Yeah.
it's 10. I'll have to. Yeah, I'm not really sure either, but I'm pretty sure I saw it as 10. Um, for me, the Game of Thrones moment that was the best was when they went off to find the White Walkers and the trekking through the snow and all that. That to me should have been its own season. Like I hated that it was only like
Yes.
3
One
episodes, 4
episode.
episodes,
No,
whatever it
not just
was.
one. It was one
It
episode.
was
I mean,
it was why do I feel like it was longer than maybe because
well,
there were
because
multiple episodes where they were, like, moving north, but coming back and then have other things. Maybe that's what I'm remembering overall.
no, man.
But yeah.
I'm going to tell you now. Part of the reason that's so frustrating is all one episode. They jetten
Yeah.
up to the wall. They go behind the wall. They find the Night King. They fight the Night King. They send the one guy back to go fetch Daenerys.
And man,
To,
what a runner he was.
it was like, you guys spent seasons, like, Arya was like trundling through the war zone, like a whole season was her just walking around, and then in one episode all this stuff happens. Yeah, you're totally right. That should have been a whole season of them north of the wall trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
find. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that would have been great watching them struggle with trying to get far enough north to for things to make sense. Meanwhile, the zombies are marching south and they're picking up more zombies on the way. I would have liked to see that kind of
Yes.
cinematography basically of the good guys heading north while the bad guys are massing as they move south and like how they're
Right.
picking up numbers. Are these just dead corpses he's reanimating along the way, or are these people that they're killing and bringing into the fold? Is it a combination of both? Like I had so many questions because I mean he had all these numbers, and then when you look at the overall map of the world
Yeah.
of Game of Thrones as we know it, I just kept questioning. It's like where did all these people come from? Because it's just
Right.
like we're told that the North is a frozen wasteland, so it's like where did all these people pop up from? And
Right.
just a lot of questions that were not explained. Then we have the whole the wildling people and the three-eyed raven and his group. The what are they called? The Forever Children or the Night Children, or they were like all of these
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that came in and they gave no explanation to us. Like that should have been a whole season of
Yeah.
explaining this stuff and why they're important and why they die and like all that. But no, we got treated to 7 seasons of incest. So whatever, whatever.
Yeah, I have some hints. I think I've because the show's over by now. House of the Dragon season 1 is over, so I've heard rumblings happens. And I told my friend, I think there are two characters who are going to continue that incest theme here at some point. We haven't got there yet, but this show doesn't balk at that kind of stuff. So, and he was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean, episode 1 of Game of Thrones went there. So anyone who's never watched the
Oh,
show, it's intense.
definitely
It's
went there. Definitely went there. So,
uh,
um, well, my own week was relatively uneventful. Just a lot of working, really, and kind of gearing up for the holidays, of course, and clearing stuff out and getting things out. We got the tree up and all that good stuff,
very
and I
nice.
was helping my mother and my aunt out a lot. They're having some health issues, so we're dealing with that, of course. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. So actually, pretty boring. I did get caught up on some of the new Trek stuff. I realized I had like either skipped it, forgotten about it, whatever. So I was technically behind.
How
So
dare you?
I fixed that. Right. That's how I felt when I found out. I was like, I'm supposed to be the guy. Like, how did I miss this? But I got it. And then also, I don't know if you're aware, but in part of that whole new Trek and getting caught up there, William Shatner will be coming to Austin and will be doing a viewing and a Q&A of The Wrath of Khan.
Oh
And
wow.
so you can buy tickets, you can go and watch The Wrath of Khan, and then after the movie's over, William Shatner will come out and he will do Q&A, answer questions, tell stories, the whole thing. So I'm considering doing it. It's supposed to be next year. I think I thought the tickets around like March. I think it
You gonna
was
try
of
and
next
go?
year.
You gonna try and do
I
that?
think so. I think so because I mean, like
Yeah.
I love the Wrath of Khan. It is like the classic Trek movie. I think you and I had seen it in the theater.
Yeah, you invited me to see it. I had never seen it,
Yeah,
and we were working at the same store or something. And yeah, I remember you
yeah, because they did
were
the
like, "Want to see it?"
remaster. Yeah, they did the remaster and the re-release and all that stuff, and it
Yeah,
was great. But now you get to do the same thing, but
the
Big
man
Bill Shatner
himself.
will be
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah, that's awesome. I'm
And
trying to
so
think of any
yeah,
question that he probably hasn't been asked yet. I mean, I'm sure he's gracious enough to repeat answers if he's gotten them before, but I would want to try and come up with something new and exciting to ask him if I had a chance. But
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I'm sure that he has been asked at 91 years old and synonymous with this character now for the past 60 years, 50 years.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I'm sure he's been asked everything. He's thought about everything. He's told every story multiple times. I don't think that there's necessarily anything new that he hasn't been asked. I think at this point it's more he's telling stories and he's just kind of having fun with it in these
Right,
travels around that he's doing,
right.
So I'm hopeful that it will be a good time if and when I get the tickets and sign up and whatever. But we should go. We should go and do that and just
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. If
yeah.
yeah, still enough time out there that I could plan ahead and do something, that'd be great.
And I'm sure there will be also, photo and autograph opportunities and whatever else for if anybody's interested. But yeah, I'll check into that and I'll get back to you with that, with all the
Okay.
final details.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great.
Okay. So now that we've told you what we're into, and there's some more things that are coming up that I want to tell you guys about, but we'll get to that towards the end. But before that, we have to, of course, talk about this episode, Destiny, which, again, interesting episode. So, do you want me to give the recap or do you want to do it?
Oh man, I could do it. This one's gonna be a little bit of a doozy. But whose turn is it? Is it?
Didn't you do Heart of Stone?
I probably it's possible. I don't remember. You do it. Go ahead. Go ahead. Knock it
All
out.
right. Okay. So this episode is it starts off with Cisco in his office, of course, and wait, am I confusing this with another episode? No, I think I'm right. I'm sorry. My brain is just
Yeah.
okay. Got you. I'm here now. Sorry. Um, Basically, sorry. Hey, we're live, so you just got to accept it when my brain freezes. We don't get to edit this out. All right. So, anyway, team
Let's
of
do it.
Cardassian scientists are going to show up on Deep Space Nine. Now, just to give you a flashback to the life support episode where Vedic Baral dies, we know that the Cardassians and the Bajorans have been working to get a peace treaty together. Peace treaty is ultimately signed, and now here we are in post peace treaty world. And we hear about these Cardassian scientists who are coming to the station to perform an experiment which will allow them to send and receive signals from the other side of the wormhole. So it will allow for communication, it'll allow for better trade, it'll allow for better security, advanced warning system, all of those things, right?
Right.
And everybody's really excited because it's the first joint venture of the Bajorans and the Cardassians and the Federation. So it's really important. Okay.
Right.
Um, Now, before all this can get started, Cisco's in his office and Kira comes in and tells him there's a Vedic who wants to meet with him. The Vedic comes in and the Vedic tells him that there is a prophecy from an ancient Bajoran by the name of Dragor. And Dragor has come up with several different prophecies, and this one in particular concerns the emissary and basically tells him he cannot allow for the Cardassians to come back to the station. If they do, they will somehow destroy it. It will blow up, basically.
Double the wormhole. To be clear,
The
the
wormhole,
wormhole be
yes, not
destroyed.
the
Yes.
yes. The
The
wormhole will be
temple.
destroyed.
What do
The
they call it?
Temple of the Prophets, or the Celestial Temple, as it's
That's it.
called by the Bajorans, will be destroyed. Cisco's kind of skeptical, and then the guy tells him what the whole prophecy is, and it's typical prophecy-ish stuff, very vague.
Yeah.
Three vipers return to their nest in the sky. Will use a sword of stars to burn the temple gates and set it ablaze. Something along those lines. Okay.
Wow, that was actually pretty good. That's pretty close. I think that's actually kind of what it was. But keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So he's telling Cisco, and the Vedic's name is Yarka, and he's telling him, you can't do this thing. That's what's going to happen. So you can't do it. Cisco's like, yeah, no. He's like, I respect your beliefs and everything else, but this is a very important thing that we're trying to do here. And I'm not going to just cancel the whole mission based off of some prophecy. Right.
Right.
So, Yarka is like, okay, whatever. I hope you reconsider. We're going to stay on the station and pray for you to change your mind.
Right.
And Cisco and Kira leave to go and meet with the Bajoran scientists who show up, and there's two of them, Dejar and Galora, and they are from the Cardassian Science Ministry, I think it was called,
Yes. Yep.
and they're there to obviously do the experiment. And they give all the pleasantries and everything else, and then they go and they meet the rest of the staff, and Dax is there telling them, I'm not really sure this is going to work. But the Cardassians are super confident and they're laying out why their plan's going to work and who needs to work with whom and all of the kind of stuff. And then they're like, we're going to get started tomorrow because everybody's tired. they leave, and Cisco's like, "Those are the two nicest Vipers I've ever met." Which,
Yes.
of course, Kira's in on it because she was there for the prophecy and knows what he's talking about. Everyone else, not so much. Um, but they're just kind of joking around it and getting plans together when one of the Cardassian women comes back in and is like, "Hey, we're going to be joined by a third colleague. She'll be here later on today." And he's like, "Cool, no problem. We'll get her some quarters." But this triggers Kira. Kira now is realizing there's three of them, not two. And this kind of is playing into the prophecy a little bit. But Cisco's like, "Hey, don't worry about it. We're going to proceed anyway."
Right.
So they continue on getting everything ready. They take the Defiant into the wormhole to the other side where the testing relay station is, and they're going to set up the equipment to do it and start sending signals back. And while they're there, they notice there's a comet that's nearby, not too close to cause any issue, but pretty to look at, basically. And
Right.
again, Kira gets triggered because it looks like a sword of stars, which is another key from the prophecy. But again, it's far away from the wormhole, so
Wormhole.
not a big deal. They start doing some test signals, and something happens with one of the signals that it actually triggers the wormhole to open. But it's an unstable opening and it's fluctuating wildly, and then it finally they're able to shut it down. But because of them doing this, it altered the gravitational pull in the area. So now the comet's trajectory has been altered and it's on a direct course to the wormhole.
Right.
They scan it, they recognize that it's got some unique properties in it that if it passes through the wormhole, it will effectively blow it up and they'll be stuck on their side of the
Right.
wormhole.
Right.
So they go back to DS9 and they're trying to come up with a plan to figure out what to do about this comet. And O'Brien comes up with the plan to use the phasers to vaporize the whole thing. Normally, the phasers wouldn't be able to do this, but he is confident he can modify them to make this happen. He gets to
Right.
work. They go and make the attempt. It doesn't work. The thing shatters into three giant chunks and various miscellaneous pieces. And they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That shouldn't have happened. And it turns out that the third scientist who joined them late was actually an operative from the Obsidian Order, and she had sabotaged O'Brien's work to make the um,
Plan fail.
make the plan fail, basically.
Yeah.
The other scientists, I think it was Galora, is the one who outs her, and so they
Right.
arrest her, and then they have to figure out a plan to make this work. But nothing they have works. They can't use the phasers because the sabotage blew up the weapon system. They can't use tractor beam because tractor beam will make it fragment even further, which will make their problem even worse. And they can't maneuver the Defiant in between the pieces because the Defiant's too big. So Cisco and Kira decide to take a shuttle that I didn't even know the Defiant had, this small little, I wouldn't even really call it. It's definitely not a runabout. It is tiny,
It's smaller
just
than
enough
that. It's like
space.
half the size of a runabout. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's and just enough space really for an engine and Kira and Cisco to sit in, and they're
Right.
able to maneuver it in between the giant pieces, and they use the warp field to create like a bubble around the giant pieces of the asteroid and guide it through the wormhole.
Right.
Um, as they're doing this, they do start to lose power, so little bits and pieces of the comet start to break off into the wormhole, and
Right.
they make it through with the major chunks, but those little pieces actually leave a filament trail, which allows for the wormhole to be wedged open just enough that they can send and receive signals. So it actually makes their overall the first mission makes it a success.
Right.
And now they realize that basically the prophecy came true, just not in the way that it was initially interpreted by Vedic Yarka. The
Right.
three vipers were the three
Comet
comet
pieces.
fragments. The Sword of Stars was the original comet with its tail. The temple gates was obviously the wormhole apertures, and then burning the temple gates was the trail of the filament that was left behind that allowed for the gate to stay open and never technically close so they can send their signals and allowed them to peer through the gates,
That's what
as
it
they
was.
said.
That's the phrase. That's right.
Yeah. So they realized it all came true, which also in a way proves that Cisco is the emissary because he did this and he made it all work, which is what the prophecy said. The emissary had to do it. So he fulfilled the role of emissary. So at the same time, while while this is going on, he's also kind of hesitant to assume the role of emissary, but ultimately his actions prove that he is the emissary. So
Right.
there you go.
Right.
Um, but yeah, essentially that's it. We have some other hijinks that ensue around this, and of course we're going to get into those. But that is essentially this episode. There was no real B plot in this
Right.
one. This was all A today.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, what do you think? Did I hit the high points? Did I get it right?
Yeah, you did. I think one of the major kind of smaller parts, which we'll get into, but I'll go and mention it, is the fact that O'Brien is working with one of the Kardashian women, and
Galore,
Galora,
Galore.
and she's giving him a hard time for all the work he's done to basically fix the station to Federation standards. Basically, the Kardashians have a lower standard for safety, and so he was having to put in safety measures, and she's like, "These are more than necessary," kind of thing. And then he kind of gets in her face a bit and says, "Look, I know what I'm doing." And she's like, "What are you talking? Like, I didn't expect a man to be interested in this kind of thing. Apparently,
Mm,
Kardashian women are the one who are more scientifically oriented in their culture." And then she later interprets his kind of confrontation of her as a romantic interest, and so she um, very openly near the end of the episode tells him, "I could provide you with children if you so desired." And he's like, "I'm happily married. What are you talking about?" And so she gives him a chaste kiss on the cheek as they part,
mm.
saying, "Your wife is a lucky woman." So it's a fun episode. Actually, I really want to say I really like these two Kardashian women, the two main Kardashian
I did too.
scientists.
Dejar and Galore, I thought they were great. They were
They're
very friendly. They were funny.
yes, yes,
They were smiling. Like everything we got from the Kardashians so far was always so doom and gloom, you know. And it was
yes.
so nice to have like bright, vibrant people, you know.
Yes. Like, for
Um,
example, when they're sitting down and Cork brings the Kardashian food and they're sitting
mhm.
with, I think, is it Dax they're sitting with? And Dax is like,
Dax and Bashir, they're sitting with them. Dax, Bashir, and O'Brien, as a matter of fact, they're all there, and then Garrett comes over with the food, and he brings all fresh, not replicated Cardassian food, including the Ragova eggs, and
right,
the third
Kardashian.
Cardassian.
She's all into
Um,
it.
I'm sorry, and that's Dejar. Dejar is the third Cardassian who is the operative. So we have Galora, Dejar, and Ulani. And Galora and Ulani are the friendly ones. Dejar is the mean one. And Dejar is all into the food. And the other two are like, we don't like Cardassian food. It's
We
gross.
prefer other
And
food. Yeah. Which is
right.
just
And they're
hilarious.
like,
Go
which
ahead.
is hilarious. And I thought that was strange too. I was like, wait a minute. Like, how could you imagine not eating your own people's food, like your own planet's food? Like, I
I
mean, we
know.
have a lot of wildly varying tastes on our own planet, and there are some
Right.
things you just, don't like or whatever. But I
Right.
can't imagine, like, even the worst meal that I could imagine here on Earth, I can't imagine there being something else on another planet that I would
It reminds me
prefer
of
to eat,
just reminds me of the
you
scene
know?
from Galaxy Quest when the character who's supposed to be like the Spock guy, I forget his name at the moment, played by
Alan
Rickman.
Rickman's
Yeah,
character.
yeah. So
Yes.
like the he gets a bowl of worms, and then
Yeah.
gosh, I'm forgetting names here.
Tim
Tim
Allen's
Allen.
character gets steak, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that reminds me of that. But yeah, that scene was just great because you really come to be endeared to these women. Like when they get off the ship they're coming
Transport.
from,
Yeah.
they give their formal greeting, and are like, "Okay, did we do it right?" Because it'd be really important if you could tell our superiors that we said it right, and because they've been hounding us all the whole time about making sure this goes well. And Cisco's like, "Oh yeah, I've gotten 3 calls from Starfleet just this morning," so they're immediately got that camaraderie. And then before they leave, they turn to Kira and say, "We really want to thank you for all the hard work you did to make this happen. We know that nothing could have worked out unless you had put in your efforts to make this happen." And you can see on Kira's face that she's like, "That's not at all what I did. I
Yeah.
was not at all like supportive of this, or at least I wasn't like going behind. I wasn't running through hoops or anything to get this to happen." But she takes the compliment and they move on. But yeah, these two Kardashian women were already like, as soon as they appeared, they're smiley, very friendly. The whole bit with O'Brien was endearing. Um, yeah, I hope we see them again, but I'm afraid we won't.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't see them again. I and again, I really appreciate that we like. I've said this before in earlier episodes. I love the world building that they do. Like we've gone into a great detail about like Cardassian architecture, for example. But so far all we have seen of Cardassians, they were all military. Gulls and legates
Yes.
and soldiers and all this other kind of stuff, right? This is the first time that we get to see people who are more civilian like. I mean, they still work in the science ministry, but still they're more just like regular people who have kind of an elevated status, which Dejar criticizes them for. But
Right.
still, they just seem, they seem very friendly. And I like the stark contrast considering that we only people we'd seen before were, Gul Dukat and Leggett Parm and these individuals. And it's just and then we can't forget Kotan Padar, who comes in for his son Rugal from way back when. But yeah, I'm just saying these guys were always so serious and then have this very light, bubbly, friendly duo here.
Right.
I did miss that, you know.
Yeah.
Didn't realize I was missing it until I saw it and was like, hey,
Yeah.
um,
The Cardassian
now,
culture just became a little more 3D, if you will.
yeah, yeah. And then the stuff with O'Brien and Galora, and she took his antagonistic nature as sexual
Attraction.
overtures,
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious, and I was just like, "Oh, apparently all my life I've been attracted to Cardassians and just didn't know it." So, uh, that's been my whole problem.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny too because like you can sense that that's what's kind of happening from her angle. The cameras show us that she's looking at him and he's just doing his thing. And as soon as O'Brien realizes it, he does the whole man thing of "I'm not interested in you it whatsoever." It comes off as like an insult, but he's trying to make it clear he's not trying to lead her on, or it's just one of those hilarious scenes where um, the whole misunderstanding of cultures. And I liked the idea in some ways that like part of what's different about them is the women were the scientifically minded ones. Like I don't know if we're going to explore that anymore, but it brings up an interesting idea. Is like, are the men kind of like this testosterone fueled sect of society, and therefore they don't have the time or patience to do the more diligent work of scientific progress, and therefore the women are the ones who end up doing the work, or is there something about the women in Cardassia that are just more oriented towards
Yeah,
scientific pursuits? I imagine we'll never really get answers to questions, but idea that
we don't.
um, it was fun. The idea that like the you put a second stopgap in the safety procedure. What's going to go wrong? The first safety procedure doesn't work. It's
It's just
like,
like, what are the
yeah.
chances? What are the chances that a primary and its backup are going to fail? And he's like, I don't know, but if it does, I don't want to be caught without a second backup. And I was just like, and that was a weird moment too because I was like, you know what? Both arguments are valid.
Yes, I agree. Yeah,
Like I could totally see you making a point. Like you have a primary system, you have a backup. That makes perfect sense. But wait a minute, you got another backup.
right.
Why? And
Yeah.
she says, like, what are the chances that that's going to happen? But then he's like, well, what if it does though? Do you really want to be caught without a secondary backup? And I was like, you know what? I mean, they're in space.
Yeah.
They don't really have an option. Like if something fails, you want as many redundancies, I guess,
I
as
totally agree.
possible.
I'm with O'Brien on this one just for the whole safety aspect. But
Yeah.
that was another great moment because she's like, okay, let me think, and she goes to her little pad and she's working out something, and he tries saying something, and she's like, I need to think. Um, and he's just like, well, I guess I'll just take a seat then. She's like, well, if you have time, you can go get me some tea. And so he's all pissed about having to get tea, which is what leads to the moment later where he confronts her about, I'm an expert at my job. I know what I'm doing, which is what leads her to think that he's romantically interested and yada, yada, yada. And, I love Keiko, but there's a part of me that was like, O'Brien, we're going to need you to make a politically advantageous marriage via Game of Thrones.
And I was like, like if this role had been reversed and this had been Jordy in this scene and not or not role reversed, but Jordy in the scene instead of O'Brien, would it have gone down the same way? Because Jordy can be a little bit of a hothead too,
Yeah,
but Jordy is also socially awkward. At least what we see of him in Next Gen.
yeah,
So it's just like, what would he do if he had suddenly found himself going from arguing contention to overt flirtation with this Cardassian woman? Would he
yeah.
have? Would he have played that off? Would he have been able to do it? I don't know. But again, fun to watch.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Um, Another fun scene that I couldn't wait to talk about happens kind of in the beginning, and this is when they are setting up the quarters for the Bajoran get not the Bajoran, but the Cardassian guests,
Right.
and we have Cisco and Odo are in the guest quarters, and they're kind of walking around and getting everything straight and all that kind of stuff. And Cisco's laying out what he wants the security expectations to be, and Quark comes in with two jars of Kanar, and
Sounds
he's
good.
very happy of the fact that he's got two jars of Kanar, and he's wanting
Three
to give it
cases
to
of
him.
it
He's
total.
got
Yeah.
3 cases in his storage, and he's just been waiting to unload them, and this is his first opportunity, and, we go through that whole bit to get to the part where he's talking about, expanding his business and starting up some Cardassian gambling concessions in the area, and, Odo's like, "If you think that you're gonna have Vol fighting, think again." And he's like, "I mean, I wouldn't do that, but I mean, if they so just happen to bring their Vols and they get into a fight, I couldn't be held responsible for that." And Odo's like, "Oh, yes, you could." And Cisco's right behind him. He's like, "And you will be." Like the
Yeah.
two of them worked so well together,
Yes.
and I loved every single bit of it. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, there's that subtle threat from Cisco that we've really been missing in some of these episodes before this. And there it was,
Yeah.
played so well. Like all three of them did such a great job in this
Right.
small minute of a scene.
Yeah. By the way, we should probably remind everyone. I think we've seen the Voles, right, in that episode where they were destroying electrical circuits or whatever. I
Yes, they were
forget the
these
episode it was,
six-armed
but
rat-looking creatures.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
they
yeah.
were disgusting.
And then
Now, voles are actually real. Not they don't look like that, but
right.
voles are real creatures. So don't think
Yes.
that because they were featured as voles in Star Trek, they're not real. They are real. Okay,
Right. There is
they're
an
not
actual
bad.
thing as a Vole. Yeah.
Yes,
Um, the other part we should follow up on is the whole. What's the drink that he got for the Cardassians called again?
Kanar.
Kanar.
Mhm.
Dax goes ahead and opens one of them and sniffs it and tells Quark,
She
"This has
tastes it.
gone bad."
She sticks she sticks her finger in it and she
Yeah.
tastes it and she's like, "Oh, this has gone bad."
Yeah, and at the end of the episode, Morn, that character who's always in the background, the gray dude with the bald head and like no lips and no nose.
And no
Apparently,
dialogue at all.
never has dialogue. Apparently, he's gotten sick for the very first time in his entire life or something like that because Quark gave him a free drink of the Kanar. And Bashir's been having to take care of him. So I just love that Quark has been pushing his regular customers to drink his poor and nasty and outdated wares.
Kanar. Now, on a side but related note, if you are interested, you can actually purchase Kanar and several other Star Trek themed spirits from the StarTrekSpirits.com website. They have a bunch of
Really?
different things that are on sale right now for the holidays, of course. You can get Klingon blood wine, you can get Romulan ale in both a whiskey and a vodka variety, you can get Kanar, and then there are several different wines that you can order as well. However, if you live in the state of Texas, you want to be able to order a couple of the wines because the wines are imported from France, and Texas has some kind of weird block against them, so you can't
Right.
get them. But other than that, the other stuff you can get varying prices. You can get everything, individually. Of course, you can get them in various sets. I know that the Romulan Ale set was selling for, I think it was like $85 a bottle, or 150, 155 for the set. You can get 6 of the major ones, which was the Romulan Ale, the Klingon blood wine, Kanar, wine from Chateau Picard, and Dorian ale or whiskey or something like that. And then there was a Bajoran spring wine. I think that makes up the set, and that was like $300 or $400. So
Right.
everything from, again, like 55 to 400 is there. It's StarTrekSpirits.com. If for no other reason than to look at the bottles, you should check it out. They did a great job of getting the same style of bottles that are used on the show
Right.
for these. So even if you're not like you're not a big drinker or whatever, but you're an avid fan, they would look cool as a
Just the
part of your like
bottles.
display and
Yeah,
stuff like that. So
that's cool.
yeah, definitely want to check that out when you get the chance. Again, StarTrekSpirits.com. And no, We're not paid by or endorsed by them in any way. I was just really curious. I looked some stuff up and I found it, and now I'm sharing my knowledge with you. So
Cool. Sponsor.
now, another scene that we have to talk about, of course, is the agenda scene. And this is where,
Oh, that's a great scene. Yeah.
yes,
Odo and
Odo and
oh,
Cisco,
and I
and
feel
they're
like this
talking
is
about
one
the
of the
agendas.
this is the one of the I was as we were watching this particular scene before we get into the details.
Mhm.
I remember thinking this is the first time I really remember the two of them having a conversation like this. These two characters have rarely had this type of close interaction. And I'm
That's
sure
true.
there's been moments, but I don't remember it as clearly as this one like popped in my mind. Like it was like, wow, this was. I mean,
That's true.
Odo is confronting Cisco, and not in like a hey, I'm the head chief of station, chief of security. No, it's more like a personal moment. He's like, hey, I've been observing you amongst other people, and this is what I
Mhm.
observed. But tell us what
Yeah.
happens there.
So again, I have always loved Cisco and Odo together. I've always felt like they would make a good like like if we had a spin-off series, right? And you could do like a crime scene, whatever, investigators, cop, whatever. These two would work well in that
Good
dynamic.
cop, bad cop thing.
Um, yeah, or bad cop, grumpy cop, but whatever.
Which one's the
The,
grumpy one?
right. It changes week to week depending on what the crime is. Um, but in this scene in particular, I liked it because Cisco wants Odo to investigate Beta Kiarka and
Mhm.
kind of understand his motivations, right? And Odo is telling him that his investigation has uncovered that Beta Kiarka is no longer a Vedic. He was defrocked, is the term that Odo uses for teaching things that were not in line with the Vedic assembly. So he is no
Right.
longer a Vedic, and Odo kind
And
of
for
lays it out for him that, Yarka obviously has an agenda and that there's a reason that he is telling Cisco what he's telling him. And he's like, it's been my observation that you humanoids, you all have agendas and it guides your choices, your decisions, whether you're aware of it or not. He goes,
right,
even your agenda guides you. And Cisco's like, I don't have an agenda. I just want this mission to succeed. It's a part of the peace treaty and everything else. And Odo's like, that's not the agenda I'm talking about. And Cisco's kind of like little taken aback, and he's like, well, "What?" And he's like, It's your agenda to not be the emissary. It's been my
right,
observation of you that you are very uncomfortable with how the Bajorans view you as their emissary, and that you
right,
have done what you can to distance yourself from that role.
right,
And so now that agenda is influencing you." And Cisco kind of has like a shocking aha moment that he didn't realize that yes, it's most likely true that he is allowing this desire to be only viewed as a Starfleet officer and nothing else to
right,
make him not listen to Yarka. And so now that
right,
he's having to sit there and kind of consider it, I thought it was a great scene. Like it shows just how one keenly observant Odo is because we never really see them, as you said, we never really see them interacting with each other a whole lot. So for him to have been watching him and to pick up on these subtleties about the man and then kind of help guide him in this way, I thought it was just great. And
right,
Cisco's response to it also, I felt like was really great to have that kind of revelation from somebody advising him like that.
right. Yeah,
What about you?
it was a great scene. As I mentioned, it stood out as a scene that I don't think I've seen this before as I was watching it. Basically Cisco being intimate with Odo, private moment, Odo confronting Cisco not as as an employee or a subordinate, but as a friend. Um, and that being kind of a sensitive thing for them both. Like Odo is not
Hmm.
just out there throwing his opinion in Cisco's face. He's like, "Hey, I think I have an insight into what's going on here." Um, so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that scene, and I think it really made Cisco a better character in this episode as well because
Hmm.
he has been reluctant with his emissary, position. Like you guys call me the emissary, especially Kai Wynn. She does it because she wants to kind of she wants to like manipulate
I was
Cisco
gonna
as
say
she's doing it.
she's trying to manipulate him.
Yeah,
She's trying to play into a certain
she's trying to
feeling.
flatter him, right?
Right.
flatter him, but also put him off his game. You know, you should do what I say because you know I know what your position means. Kind of anyway. So I really like that moment, and I think that really kind of leads us into the kind of the big point of this episode is the whole prophecy angle. Which,
Hmm.
as I was watching, I was like, man, okay. So first off, I have to say this is one of the reasons why time travel and being introduced to a story is frustrating because just like 2 episodes ago they were time traveling, and then in this episode they're all like, how could a guy 3,000 years ago know the future? I'm like, guys.
So so this is, this is one of those things where we've kind of touched on this a couple of different times, but Star Trek attempting to talk about religion and its significance to people and how things play out and all that kind of stuff is uncharted territory, or was uncharted territory for the time. This had never been done before, and they were really constructing religion. And of course, they grabbed a lot of things from a lot of different faiths, and then also just completely came up with a lot of things to kind of fit the otherworldly sci-fi aspect of it.
Right.
I love that, in a weird way, I feel like they kind of touched on that here in the episode, because Kira, once they're on the Defiant and she's trying to reconcile what's going on, her and Cisco have a kind of a side meeting when she's, kind of thrown by the appearance of the Sword of Stars, the comet.
Mhm.
And she calls him out on it. She's like, okay, because he says, if I'm going to call this mission off, I need something, provable, concrete, something Starfleet. And she's
Right.
like, okay, well, the prophets, or the wormhole aliens as you call them, they exist outside of linear time. You know that, you prove that. And he's
Right.
like, yes. And he's like, okay, so isn't it possible that these non-linear aliens could have seen something that happened and told it to another Bajoran who
Has communicated to us.
interpreted it as a prophecy? Totally possible. And as a Starfleet officer who has more than likely seen all kinds of wild stuff, Cisco would have to accept that logic. I thought she did a great job of playing into what he was asking for. Give me a Starfleet reason. There it is.
Right.
You have met advanced aliens before with advanced capabilities, advanced technology, advanced knowledge. You've done that multiple times. You know that they can be weird to communicate with. And in fact, you have communicated with this particular group of aliens before. You know their style. So if
Right.
anybody would have an intensely accurate understanding of these aliens and their communication style, it's Cisco.
Right.
So this would have made sense to him. But the fact that he still blows her off to a certain degree, that bothered me a little bit, to be honest. Because I was like, you are the one who proved it.
Right.
You did. So
Yeah. Well, I think what's
yeah.
really interesting though about that very point is that because she's coming at him, even in that moment as she's trying to use a more rational, throw out the religious aspect of the argument, because she is convinced from the religious angle of this prophecy, he is just digging in his heels. Like, there's no
Yeah.
way Kira could ever be the person to convince him because he knows what she's thinking. In fact, she kind of blurts stuff out in the middle of the on deck. He had to
Hmm.
pull her aside to get her to, hey, cut that out. Um, but what's interesting is that the episode makes the point by the end that everything Cisco does is what ultimately was the right decision, and I think that's even made kind of a point that's made is the Vedic who comes to see him says, "Well, you're the emissary. I trust you'll do the right thing." Like,
Hmm.
he trusts that the emissary will do the right thing, and again, that puts Cisco in this weird position of like, well, I don't consider myself the emissary. I got to do what's right from what I can do, and it's kind of fascinating the idea. Put it this way: when a prophecy is introduced to a story, there's basically only two ways you can go about it. Maybe there's a third, but there's two main ways I would say it really happens. Either the prophecy is ultimately revealed to be complete bunk, and it takes time before it's revealed to be complete bunk, which I figured this was maybe what the episode was going to go for, is it
Hmm.
would be bunk by the end, because the Vedic, he was interpreting it incorrectly or something. But what they do instead is that, yes, he's interpreting it incorrectly, but it's that he couldn't escape the prophecy. The prophecy came true. That's the other angle. Is the prophecy comes true no matter what you try and do. If you try to escape the prophecy, you just fulfill the prophecy. Oedipus Rex
Mhm.
you're gonna kill your father and marry your mother. They send their son off, so he grows up somewhere else and ends up ultimately killing his father and marrying his mother, and they fulfill the very prophecy they were trying to undo. Um,
Okay,
so
first of all, stop. Sorry. Excellent point. However, let's not ever talk about Oedipus again. I don't like that play. I've
you've
never
seen
liked it. I've read it, I've seen it, Antigone, all of them. I don't like it. I don't know. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but it does, and
All right,
I hate
never
it.
again, never
Yeah,
again. All right.
sorry.
Well, the
So I
point
mean,
stands that
great
prophecy.
reference. You made a great point. Yes, it fits, but I just a personal note. Perry does not like Oedipus, Antigone, Clytemnestra. None of them. Just leave that out. Out.
Cleopatra?
No, I don't mind that. Just that story arc, that branch
I know.
of
I'm
Greek
just
mythology. I
Cleopatra is
can't.
way some
Yeah,
totally separate. I'm just playing.
yeah.
Anyway, point being though is that um, so part of the reason I was a little, at least, I mean, in retrospect, I like this episode a little bit more, but the parts that were bugging me is the whole prophecy angle. Like, for example, the Sword of Stars.
Yeah.
Like, Kira sees this comment and she makes the interpretation, but she's really having to fit, in my opinion, a square peg in a round hole. She's kind of having to pull that out and make it work. Like, if the prophecy had never existed, she wouldn't have had this negative reaction. And
Well,
what's interesting is I don't know that Cisco would have made any different decisions himself if he hadn't heard the prophecy. Sorry,
and
go ahead.
that's the point that Dax makes. Dax comes to him and he's reading through
You're
the
right.
various
Yeah.
prophecies, and Dax tells him she asks him, "What would you do? Like if you had never heard of this prophecy, what would you do?" And he says, "I would have just carried out the mission." And he's like, "Okay, so then the question you need to ask yourself is, are you going to listen to the prophecy and let it make all your decisions for you, or are you just going to live your life and do what you got to do?" And
Right.
he in that moment, he makes a decision. We actually get to see a bit more of Dax here in several different ways,
Yeah.
throughout this episode. And I really loved the advisory roles that both her and Odo took in this episode. I thought it was
Yeah.
very interesting that it was those two. If you watch, it's those two that really kind of guide Cisco through this whole ordeal, which is funny because Vedic Yarka later comes to Kira and he's like, "You are supposed to be the person here who's chosen to help the emissary." Really, all she does is keeps reminding him of the prophecy. She doesn't really help him. She
Right.
just keeps reminding him of the prophecy, and then she sits with him on a runabout. The people who guide him are Odo and Dax.
Right.
They do the real guiding.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, Dax is the one that kind of gets him finally to take action and stop worrying so much about these prophecies.
Right. So for me, what's frustrating is the idea that by the end of the episode, if during the episode we're trying to interpret this prophecy and we ultimately end up interpret it incorrectly, and then we're at the end of the episode, we in like 10 seconds find out that we interpreted it wrong and here's how it should have been interpreted. It's a reveal of sorts, but for me it felt like, okay, well then, I mean, the Dax scene is important, so maybe that kind of undermines everything I'm trying to say here because she points it out and therefore Cisco does what he does. But
Hmm.
for me it's a question of, like, if someone were going to prophesy something to you and say, Perry, tomorrow someone's going to run a red light and hit your car, it's so you would make a different decision. If you're going to fulfill a prophecy, prophecies are supposed to be fulfilled. If you're gonna, you can't. The whole point of prophecies is you can't run away from them. They're always fulfilled. So I feel like just as all of the interpretations were incorrect the first time, I feel like they were having, like, for example, the vipers, like the three vipers, blah blah blah. But like it's just three stone fragments. Like vipers actually made more sense in terms of like an antagonistic role that like the
It made
Cardassians
more
were fulfilling.
Exactly. That was a part of it too that threw me off because I was like, I understood why they wanted to call them Vipers because they were the former enemy. But when it
Right.
then turns out to be the comet, it also didn't make sense to me because I was like,
Yes.
Vipers are a threat. They're dangerous. Whenever someone says Vipers, you do think of a certain
Scream.
lethality. These are
Yeah.
just these are just comet fragments. Like again, they were harmless before, and if it wasn't for the wormhole being where it is, they would still be harmless. Like that's the whole thing. Like the comet didn't do anything to gain an aggressive nomenclature, I
Antagonistic
guess.
role.
Right. it,
Yeah.
it didn't do anything. Now the Cardassians on the other hand did. I would have much preferred if this was like if they had changed this and instead of calling them vipers, called it something else, or
Right.
maybe made more of the vipers and maybe something inadvertently that the three of them did that
Right.
made this a threat that they were responsible for. Keep
Yeah.
Ulani and Galora still positive or whatever, but kind of change it to where because of the three vipers, there's this other thing. I think that's where they were trying to go, but they didn't get the language right. And I think it's a
Yes.
failure because they were trying to intentionally stay vague, but
Right.
they ended up messing themselves over because
And
in the
that's
end the language didn't match what happened.
and that's exactly what my frustration is because it becomes clear by the end of the episode that the prophecy was weird not because in universe it makes sense that it was weird, but because the writing of the episode was kind of flawed around that aspect. Again, as you pointed out, the show is trying to do something new, trying to go in new directions, talk about religion in a way that hasn't been done before. And again, I want to be very clear. I like this episode quite a bit, especially now that we're talking about it. We can go over a lot of things. There were a lot of great
Yeah.
moments. I definitely would say this is one worth watching. Now that I've seen the episode, I can know all those little details, and maybe I'll catch more on a second viewing. But for my initial viewing, especially the whole time when I was watching, there's the Vedic guy, and he's kind of nutty. Um, is he a nut because religions are nutty, or because he's a nut, or basically I was just trying the whole time trying to figure out like what are we trying to say about prophecies,
Hmm.
um, from a storytelling element. Anyway, lots of things, but overall enjoyed the episode.
Yeah.
Thought it was a good one. Um,
S-
yeah.
So in my problem with Deep Space Nine and religion, and especially the way they try to frame the Vedics, the Kai, and all of them, they do try to give them this kind of religious zealotry angle. But to me, it always falls flat because their gods are real, like they're provable real.
Right.
In all of our faiths, all of the higher being stuff that you want to talk about, whatever it is, it all exists in this area of faith. We have to take it on faith, that this being exists because there's no proof one way or another. And however you want to look at it,
The
no
physical
being
proof of
of
religions on Earth are there's the
right,
metaphysical, and
right.
yet there's a
But
physical element
yeah,
to the
in
Bajoran
Star
belief.
Trek, right. In
Yeah.
Star Trek, we know these like they have manifested themselves
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
And they've done it multiple times and it's on camera even at certain points,
Right.
so yeah, so to say that these people are religious zealots doesn't work here because they have an aspect of proof that we don't have.
Right.
And so that's why I always had a problem with it because I was like, you want me to kind of think of them in this way, but I mean, what would you do if you had that kind of proof that a all-knowing, all-powerful being was directly guiding your life,
Right.
and could do stuff to you, pull you at a time, talk to you, give you stuff, take stuff away, change, like all of these things could happen.
Right.
Yeah, I think everybody, if that was available, would have a very strong reaction to it. And
Right.
that's what we see here, but they don't communicate it well. But I always, even though it causes in my head it's a problem, I always give them a pass because again, this was something that no one was attempting. In most sci-fi, they steer clear of religion. And anytime that there's any talk of God or a godlike creature or whatever, they come up with reasons and ways to debunk it. And often it turns out to be the villain in these
Yes,
scenarios.
that is
That's
very
not the
true.
that's
Yes.
not the real God, and then it becomes this malevolent alien
Right.
beast creature.
Yeah,
This is the
it's
first time that
usually
we're seeing it different.
you're totally right about that. It's a malevolent beast creature. It always cloaks itself in white light. It looks angelic until it like turns
Until
evil,
it mauls
basically.
you, right? Until it gets right in
Yeah.
your face and eats you.
Another thing that's done also is a lot of, especially in video games I've seen, it's a goddess. There's goddess is very more. It's easier to make it kind of, I think, more palatable. It's a
Mhm.
benevolent creature. It's a benevolent woman figure. Um, the Mother Mary type, or even the pagan goddesses of fertility type kind of thing. It's like it's just more palatable. You don't have to really get too much into a bunch of theology. You can just say there's a loving mother goddess who brought about the world and blah blah
Hmm.
blah. Not that that always works out. To be clear, a lot of times in those stories, the goddess is evil herself. She's the mad creature, or whatever. But anyway, point being is that I like this episode. The prophecy angle was a difficult element for them to wrestle with. I don't think they fully got it. I don't think they fully got their hands around it. But overall, great episode. Enjoyed the Cardassians, the O'Briens, the Dax, the Odo moments.
Hmm.
Overall, a great episode.
I'm going to agree. I think it's interesting because this is the second time that I can remember that an episode that everybody else typically rated as kind of a middling episode, maybe a 5 out of 10, or maybe even a 3 out of 10. We have found aspects of it that can be appreciated, and to
Mhm.
me, elevated beyond that. Is this a solid 10 out of 10 episode? No, there are some mistakes or whatever, but I would give this definitely. I'd say it's a solid 7. It's creeping into eight
I'd say
territory,
at
but
least eight.
uh,
Yeah, yeah, I'd
yeah,
say at least eight.
um, and the only reason why I would not go full on 8 really is because there were a couple of contradictory things, like again with Kira, and initially she was so dismissive of Yarka, and she's like, "There's only going to be two Cardassians, not three," and then the moment the third one showed up, she instantly was there. There's three of them. There's
Yeah,
going to be like that bothered me because she was already in the camp of siding with Cisco and had no issue, and
right,
then all of a sudden that's all it took for her to suddenly be back on this track, and I didn't like that for her. I mean, and to again give it a pass because of again how we're supposed to view the Bajorans here,
right.
but for the sake of consistency of the show, I felt like that was a bit of a misstep.
Yeah,
um
if I may interject real quick, I just want to say I think that's actually kind of what bothered me as well. Because as someone who takes his faith seriously, there are a lot of times when you look out and you see other people and they say things about what they believe, and you're supposed to agree on things, and they are on a different level than you are. And you're right
mhm,
with Kira, like suddenly, like she's got the Kool Aid all the way drunk in like a quick second. It's like, wait
yeah.
a minute, girl, like you're
Like
not gonna
they essentially walked down the hall because she was in
right,
the office with him when Cisco dismissed him, and she just kind of rolled her eyes at Yarka a little bit. Like she listened to him, but then when Cisco was like, "Yeah, there's only going to be two," like she chimed right in. There's only going to be two of them. Like she was
right,
exasperated with him for bringing this up, and
right,
then the very next scene is them going to meet Ulani and Galora, and as soon as they find out there's a third one, what? There's a third. There's
third
going to be
vector.
three of
What?
them. Like,
Yeah,
she couldn't even get out of her chair. She was left staring at the door. Like, everybody else had returned to the conversation. She couldn't even change in her seat. She was so struck, you know?
right,
So, yeah,
yeah,
that just kind of bothered me that she was so vocal in 1 minute and then instantly changed, and then she
right,
just stayed on that path. I mean, if they wanna make that a thing for her and kinda give her a gradual getting to a point of being from skeptic to believer, I would have appreciated that, and I mean, I get it, time constraints, writing what it is, you can only do so much, whatever, but it still seemed, even with knowing all that, it still just seemed too fast. She jumped on board too hard, too fast, and
right.
that's what kinda keeps it from getting there for me.
Yeah, I would have appreciated if she was a more slow burn as things come along,
Yeah.
and she like instead of being like wide eyed, but more like squinty eyed, like three of them. Well, before I was skeptical, but now my skepticism has been challenged. That kind of thing. But yeah,
So now at the end of the episode, of course, we find out that again the prophecy came true, just not in the way that they thought. Cisco has now proven himself to be the emissary, and we hear that there are more of these prophecies that Dragor has laid out. And as the episode ends, we hear that Dragor has said that the emissary will soon face a fiery trial. So is this a bit of foreshadowing? Or were they just kind of giving us, a little, oh, there's more to this than, just kind of a cast off or whatever. Um, I guess we're gonna have to see and see
right.
how true it proves to be. Um, but yeah, again, overall interesting episode, a solid episode. I definitely would say don't skip this one because there's a lot of great character development that we get out of this
Yeah,
that we really I felt like we kind of needed for an ensemble cast, and it's hard to do an episode for every single person every time. This one kind of got us back to the track of Cisco and what's going on with him, which is where we started the show and everything else. So we kind of
And
get more
actually,
of that.
and as we
Um,
finish up, I just want to say
yeah,
I like that it was a Cisco-oriented episode. Again, one of the complaints I have is that
yeah.
Picard is usually the center of the TNG cast, and Cisco doesn't seem to get the same benefit. So
And
Cisco's a
I'll
great
only
character.
say as a m- and I'll only say as a mild spoiler because again, remind you all, David has never seen Deep Space Nine, so mild spoiler is we're getting there, we're getting
Good,
there.
good,
So
good. All right.
also we get two new rules of acquisition: the 34th and the 35th
That's right.
rule. I can't leave without mentioning those. The 34th rule being
No,
peace is good for business.
except,
No, that's the 34th rule. The 35th rule is war is good for business. Uh, yes, it's easy
I,
to get them confused, as
yes,
we find out. But
yeah.
it's Dax who says it, and she says it wrong. She says,
Well, she
"As
intentionally says it wrong, I think. She sets Cork up to correct her so that he reveals that both war and peace are good for business.
absolutely." So
Uh,
so great stuff. Again, great stuff for this episode. You should definitely give it a watch.
yeah, this is up
Find out
there.
your
I'd
favorite
say
parts.
I'd say it's a solid 8, maybe even a 9, quite frankly. I don't know if quite 9, but certainly an 8 in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think that's going to pretty much do it for us tonight here at Fire Caves. It's getting kind of late for us to do such a long podcast anyway. Do want to remind everybody again, if you are interested at all in kind of trekking up your holiday, go take a look at StarTrekSpirits.com. You might find something that either you want to try or just want to buy for the look. Those Kanar bottles, they are stylish, man. Just take a look at them alone. I think it's worth a look. The site is worth a look. Um, but yeah, go ahead and take a look at that. Prodigy is still the only Trek that's giving new episodes right now, but I think they're getting ready to wrap up. I think Discovery should be coming back here really soon, and then of course we have the final season of Star Trek Picard debuting next year. So we may have a lull where we're without any new Trek for about a month, but we'll get through it. You can always come here and listen to us, and we'll fill you in until the stuff comes back. But as we say every week, until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.